So as we all know, unfortunately, Adam Page suffered a concussion against Jon Moxley in his match on AEW's Dynamite. Now, I read a couple of articles and thank God he's doing okay. Concussions is not anything to play with. But if you know anything about me, I love sports, I love wrestling, but I also love understanding how the human body works, especially in these injuries. That's why I come to my man, Brian Schuterer, to explain how these things work. Now, before we get into the video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you rock with the content, give me a like. And I've had a couple of people who made some comments really quick. They were like, well, this guy's a reactor reacting to a reaction. They've reached the butthole of YouTube or something like that. But here's the thing. He's a medical professional. He's not reacting. He's explaining how these things work. But I'm a reactor. If you want to put the reaction blame on anybody, put it on me. All right. Now let's get into this video.
Last night during All Elite Wrestling, Hangman Adam Page suffered a very concerning looking injury that ultimately required him to be stretchered out of the ring. Welcome back everybody, I'm Dr. Brian Schuterer, and if you're new here and you enjoy learning about the medical side of what we see in the sports world, then please be sure and subscribe to my channel for all future videos. I don't typically cover wrestling on this channel, but I got a lot of questions last night on social media asking me to take a look at this unfortunate situation here that frankly could have been a lot worse, as we've learned this morning that Page was discharged from the hospital, just diagnosed with a concussion. But let's kind of walk through this whole sequence, talk about what went wrong, what could have happened, and sort of the medical response afterwards. As Page is coming in here, you can see the contact that occurs to really more the left side of his neck and sort of upper jaw. And even if this doesn't result in a direct impact to the head that causes the concussion, that amount of whiplash that you sustain is enough for the brain to move back and forth in the skull and give you what we call this coup counter coup type of injury that can certainly cause a concussion without that direct head trauma. Now, there is enough there, I think, on the jaw of Page to warrant enough energy for a brain injury. And then also as he comes to the mat was probably the most concerning part of this, because we've seen athletes in other sports. There was a bare knuckle boxer who actually died recently after suffering a spinal cord injury during a fall. And so as he comes down, you can see how he lands on his head, unfortunately, and it bends a little bit off to the side here. We've got one other view here that showed how Page landed with his head on the mat. And you can see how it's not necessarily a direct axial load, meaning directly into the top of his head, but his head is sort of bent off to his left side. If we correlate that with our biodigital anatomy tool, on the side of our cervical vertebrae, we have these little joints called facet joints. They sort of sit right around in this area. And part of whenever you bend your neck to the side, it's going to be stopped or restrained by these little facet joints. So whenever you bend your neck that severely in that forced lateral flexion, you can not only injure or potentially dislocate these facet joints, but if you also notice there's a little nerve here that comes out of the hole just in front of those little facet joints. And so whenever you bend your neck severely to the side, not only do you run risk of fracture to these vertebrae, dislocations of these cervical vertebrae and spinal cord injury, but also just compression of these nerve roots as they leave the neck. So not only are we worried about a spine injury here, but we also have to be worried as sort of the follow-up, if there's no spine injury, about injury to those peripheral nerve roots as they've exited Page's neck. With fractures of the cervical spine, there usually is more of a component of this direct axial load, meaning a force that comes in directly towards the top of the head and kind of compresses the spine together. That's like what we saw happen with Big E when he broke his neck. We don't see that as much here with Page, and I think that's probably part of what resulted in this just being a concussion and not something more severe like a spinal cord injury.
Yeah, because I thought that was interesting because I was wondering if the concussion came from the impact from Jon Moxley or from him hitting the mat. But as far as what he's explaining, it can come from one or the other or maybe both combined. So hopefully he explains that thoroughly.
You can have both concussion and a spinal cord injury, but one of the things right away that made me think concussion is you can see how Page's body is a little bit stiff. There's a little bit of increased tone signified here by his trunk actually being up off the ground. We can see his legs are actually also in a little bit of a rigid position here, which is something that more commonly happens when there's been a concussion. Now, again, you can have a concussion and you can have a spine injury, but that initial sort of rigidity that we saw in his body was more suggestive and from the concussion. Now, next right away here, we can see the ref comes in and waves it off. I'm guessing he realized that Page was probably unconscious during this, and that of course is going to be enough to end the match. We can then see now that he's lost some of that increased tone. The stomach and the trunk are more flat on the ground. The legs are more relaxed because he's probably starting to regain consciousness. But again, doesn't matter. That initial loss of consciousness, call it off. I think it's also worth pointing out his opponent was doing some odd sort of posturing stuff back here. I don't know if this is just like a celebratory move, but he certainly also could have been concussed here. And the fact that he was sort of straightening those arms out in that rigid position looked concerning as well. So hopefully they give him a good, proper evaluation assessment for a concussion too.
I love Brian Schuderer, but we, as wrestling fans, we know that that's not anything. I mean, maybe they should give him an evaluation because you never know, but we all know that's all part of wrestling. They have to pretend like they've suffered the worst damage or some type of head trauma, and that's what Jon Moxley was doing. He's just like, rolling over and acting like he was extremely hurt, but he doesn't watch a lot of wrestling, so he doesn't know.
Next, we see the medical personnel come out. And if you're watching NFL, things are going to look different with these spinal cord injury protocols. Every sport, every arena is going to have a slightly different action plan. We call it an EAP, Emergency Action Plan, about how they handle these types of situations. First person who gets out here, though, is typically in charge of the whole situation. They should have control of the cervical spine. They have the most important part of the body that you're trying to keep safe, which is the neck. Know that in these situations, if there's any loss of consciousness or concern by this provider that Page can't answer his questions accurately, you assume that there's been a spinal cord injury and you activate that protocol to go forward with putting somebody on the backboard. So it doesn't matter here what else the rest of the evaluation shows, if he's moving his hands, his arms, his legs or not. If he's unconscious or he's not alert enough to properly answer questions, you can't trust what he says anyways, and so you assume that there's been a neck injury. So know that whenever we see somebody put on a spine board, that doesn't mean they've diagnosed a neck injury or a spine injury. It just means that we have enough concern for one possibly being there that we protect the neck and be as safe as possible. Once we've determined we're worried about a neck injury, the next step is, of course, how we're going to get somebody from being in this position we call prone or down on their stomach to over on their back to ultimately get them on a backboard. You'll typically see in sort of the main sports that we wait for more people to get out there because we want to make sure we're stabilizing the neck and helping to turn him in a protected way. We catch a little bit of that turn here, and this unfortunately is something that I think is an opportunity for AEW to improve. Again, they probably just don't have as much experience with this sort of thing, but you never want in this situation to take your two hands off of the neck.
And I'm not trying to be funny, but as much as like serious injuries that they've been suffering in AEW, and I know it happens in most wrestling promotions, but I feel like as far as like a major promotion with AEW, I feel like it's happened more consistently than others. Not that it's like every day or something like that, but I've seen it happen a lot. So you would think that their medical staff would have enough experience dealing with other people, unless they just switch them out every time and it's a different person every single time, then that's different. But they've had a lot happen. Like, honestly, I've noticed that.
If you're truly worried about a neck injury, you want to make sure that this person who's at the head of the bed in charge keeps their hands under the cervical spine, acting like a cervical collar or a brace the entire time. You then have other people come in who actually help the athlete roll.
Yeah, it looks like he's rolling on his own. And from what I've understand, I'm not like all knowledgeable about this medical profession stuff, but I know for a fact that you're not supposed to allow the person who's injured to roll themselves over because they can suffer even worse injury or cause worse harm to whatever is causing the issue, especially if it's a spinal injury or something to do with their brain or their skull or anything like that. You're supposed to have your hands under their neck and then have someone roll the person over instead of having the person do it on their own strength.
So the athlete shouldn't be doing anything active. It should all be controlled by the people around them. Mm-hmm. So obviously things turned out okay here, but I think in the future, this is a good opportunity for AEW to look at these action plans and really make sure they've got proper cervical spine technique, because you never want to see an athlete having to roll on their own with nobody really controlling the neck while they do so, if you're truly worried about a neck injury. Now with a different angle though, we can see that provider at the head of the athlete is sort of back in control, hands back under in that proper position, which is great. There's a lot of different techniques you'll see used for getting somebody on a backboard, and there's really no right or wrong way. It just depends on what the medical personnel is most comfortable with. So again, in that action plan, we'll talk with the ambulance that's there about, okay, which technique are we going to use? It looks like they only have 4 people here. And so in this case, you'll put 2 people on one side. And what you'll do is you'll have these 2 people basically pull whenever they lift the athlete back up, while the person on the other side pushes the backboard underneath them, and the person up at the head of the bed keeps control of the cervical spine and basically just moves with everybody else. You'll sometimes see a lift technique where people just lift the athlete straight up, slide the backboard in underneath their feet. Again, it depends on how many people you have, and it depends on what everybody's most comfortable with. Obviously, it's fantastic news to hear that Page was discharged from the hospital and was diagnosed with just a concussion, because yes, this certainly could have been much worse. It's an important lesson that while a lot of stuff in wrestling is scripted, there's still very, very real chance for very real injuries. And It's hard when you don't know as a fan watching, is this part of the script? Is this a real thing? And that's what a lot of the questions were about last night. Clearly the ref made a great call initially realizing that this was very real, getting the medical personnel out there. Remember that just because the only thing we've heard about is a concussion, that doesn't mean there's not other injuries, like maybe some nerve irritation, maybe something with some strain or sprain of the neck muscles or neck ligaments. So this doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be a quicker return. There could be a lot of other stuff that still has to be worked out and that Paige will still have to recover from. But that's it for the video. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.
Yeah, as I said before, man, thank God that Adam Page is doing a lot better, that he was discharged. And at the end, when he said that it's hard as a fan to know what's going on. I mean, we've watched wrestling for a long time, so we know when it's fake or not. You know, for the most part, a referee comes out, if they send out a medical team, if you see the X, they do this. Or if you see the other wrestler crawl over to them and try to check on them like Jon Moxley did, if they completely stop the fight, like it's just a change of energy that happens during a match that lets you know that something serious happened. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but that's just what I noticed. But man, again, I love when Brian's Shooter explain these things and lets us know exactly what happened. What do you guys think about this situation? Should AEW improve their medical staff? Should they do better? I think it's obvious that they should. But this is in no way a form of me trying to bash on AEW. It just happened to be the place where this injury had happened recently. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Thank you guys so much for watching. I am half asleep right now, if you guys didn't know. Salute, peace, have a good day.